Excuse me, sir, but there's a little more to it than that.
What do you mean, Mr. Tabb?
I mean, sir, the seacocks.
What are the seacocks?
Oh, well, the seacocks are the valves to drain out the boat. They're always kept tight closed when you're afloat.
Yes?
Well, yesterday when I examined that boat, I found they'd been opened.
Well, what could be the reason for that?
Just this. That's what flooded the boat and sunk her.
Are you implying?
That boat never capsized at all. I know it's a terrible thing to say, sir, but in my opinion, she was scuttled. And there's them holes.
What holes?
In her planking.
What are you talking about?
Of course, that boat's been underwater for over a year. And tide's been knocking her against the ridge. But it seemed to me, them holes looked as if she'd made them from the inside.
Then you believe she must have done it deliberately?
Couldn't have been no accident. Not with her knowledge of boats.
You knew the former Mrs. De Winter very well, I believe.
Oh, yes.
Would you believe her capable of suicide?
No, frankly, I would not. You never can tell.
You may stand down, Mr. Tabb. Mr. De Winter, please. I'm sorry to drag you back for further questioning, Mr. De Winter, but you've heard the statement of Mr. Tabb. I wonder if you can help us in any way.
I'm afraid not.
Can you think of any reason why there should be holes in the planking of the late Mrs. De Winter's boat?
Well, of course I can't think of any reason.
Has anyone ever discussed these holes with you before?
Well, since the boat has been at the bottom of the ocean, I scarcely think that likely.
Mr. De Winter, I want you to believe we all feel very deeply following this matter, but you must remember that I don't conduct this inquiry for my own amusement.
That's rather obvious, isn't it?
I hope that it is. Well, since Mrs. De Winter went sailing alone, are we to believe that she drove those holes herself?
Well, you may believe what you like.
Can you enlighten us as to why Mrs. De Winter should have wanted to end her own life?
I know of no reason whatever.
Mr. De Winter, however painful it may be, I have to ask you a very personal question. Were relations between you and the late Mrs. De Winter perfectly happy? Were relations between you and the late Mrs. De Winter perfectly happy?
I won't stand this any longer, and you might as well know now. My wife, she's fit.
We'll adjourn till after lunch. Mr. De Winter, I presume you'll be available for us then?
I told you you should have had some breakfast. You're hungry, that's what's the matter with you.
Mr. Frith thought you might like to have some lunch from the house and sent me with it.
Oh, that's fine, man. And can you pull around the corner?
Very good, sir.
Awfully foolish of me fainting like that.
Nonsense. If you hadn't fainted like that, I'd have really lost my temper.
Darling, please be careful.
Darling, wait here a few moments. I'll see if I can find old Frank.
Of course, darling. Don't worry about me. I'll be all right.
Sure. Here. I spotted this. Do you good.
Thank you.
Are you all right?
Yes, of course.
Won't be long.
Right you are.
Hello. And how does the bride find herself today? I say, marriage with Max is not exactly a bed of roses, is it?
I think you better go before Maxim gets back.
Oh, jealous, is he? Well, I can't say I blame him. But you don't think I'm the big bad wolf, do you? I'm not, you know. I'm a perfectly ordinary, harmless bloke. And I think you're behaving splendidly over all this. Perfectly splendidly. You know, you've grown up a bit since I last saw you. It's no wonder.
What do you want, fellow?
Oh, hello, Max. Things are going pretty well for you, aren't they? Better than you ever expected. I was rather worried about you at first. That's why I came down to the inquest.
Well, I'm touched by your solicitude, but if you don't mind, we'd rather like to have our lunch.
Lunch? I say, what a jolly idea. Rather like a picnic, isn't it? Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if I put this there? You know, Max, old boy, I really think I ought to talk things over with you.
Talk what things over?
Well, those holes in the planking, for one thing. Those holes that were drilled from the inside. Oh, Mullen.
Yes, sir?
Would you like a good fellow have my car filled with petrol? It's almost empty.
Very good, sir.
And Mullen, close the door, will you?
Yes, sir.
Does this bother you? You know, boy, I have a strong feeling that before the day is out, somebody's going to make use of that rather expressive, though somewhat old-fashioned term, foul play. Am I boring you with all this? No? Good. Well, you see, Max, I'm finding myself in a rather awkward position. You've only got to read this note to understand. It's from Rebecca. And what's more, she had the foresight to put a date on it. She wrote it to me the day she died. Incidentally, I was out on a party on that night, so I didn't get it until the next day.
And what makes you think that note would interest me?
Oh, I'm not going to bother you with the contents now, but I can assure you that it is not the note of a woman who intends to drown herself that same night. By the way, what do you do with old bones? Let over, may one? However, for the time being... You know, Max, I'm getting awfully fed up with my job as a motor car salesman. I don't know if you've ever experienced the feeling of driving an expensive motor car that isn't your own, but it can be very, very exasperating. You know what I mean. You want to own the car yourself. I've often wondered what it'd be like to retire to the country, have a nice little place with a few acres of shooting. I've never figured out what it'd cost a year, but I'd like to talk about it with you. I'd like to have your advice on how to live comfortably without hard work.
Hello, Favell. Are you looking for me, Maxim?
Yes. Mr. Favell and I have a little business transaction on hand. I think we had better conduct it over at the inn.
They may have a private room there.
Well, see you later.
Find Colonel Julian. Tell him I want to see him immediately. Come on, Favell, let's go. Have you a private room, please?
Of course, sir. Through that. Hope this will do, Mr. De Winter.
Oh, splendid. Splendid. Exactly like the Ritz.
Any orders, gents?
Yes, you might bring me a large brandy and soda. How about you, Max? Have one on me. I feel I can afford to play host.
Thanks, I don't mind if I do.
Make it two, will you, like a good fellow?
Very good, sir.
Where's Mr. De Winter?
Through the other door, sir.
Colonel Julian, this is Mr. Favell.
Oh, I know Colonel Julian. We're old friends, aren't we?
Well, since you're old friends, I assume you also know he's head of the police here. I think he might be interested to hear your proposition. Go on, tell him all about it.
I don't know what you mean. I mean, is that I hope to give up selling cars and retire into the country.
Actually, he offered to withhold a vital piece of evidence from the inquest if I made it worth his while.
I only want to see justice done, Colonel. Now, that boat builder's evidence suggested certain possible theories concerning Rebecca's death. One of them, of course, is suicide. Now, I have a little note here which I consider puts that possibility quite out of court. Read it, Colonel.
Jack, darling, I've just seen the doctor and I'm going down to Mandalay right away. I shall be at the cottage all this evening and shall leave the door open for you. I have something terribly important to tell you. Rebecca.
Now, does that look like the note of a woman who had made up her mind to kill herself? And apart from that, Colonel, do you mean to tell me that if you wanted to commit suicide, you'd go to all the trouble of putting out to sea in a boat and then take a hammer and chisel and laboriously knock holes through the bottom of it? Come, Colonel, as an officer of the law, don't you feel there are some slight grounds for suspicion?
Of murder?
What else? You've known Max a long time, so you know he's the old-fashioned type who'd die to defend his honor, or who'd kill for it.
It's blackmail. Pure and simple.
Blackmail is not so pure, nor so simple. It can bring a lot of trouble to a great many people. And the blackmailer sometimes finds himself in jail at the end of it.
Oh, I see. You're going to hold De Winter's hand through all this. Just because he's the big noise around here, and he's actually permitted you to dine with him.
Be careful, Favell. You brought an accusation of murder. Have you any witnesses?
I do have a witness.
Oh.
It's that fellow Ben. That stupid coroner hadn't been as much of a snob as you are. He'd have seen that half-wit was hiding something.
And why should Ben do that?
Because we caught him once, Rebecca and I, peering at us through the cottage window. Rebecca threatened him with the asylum. That's why he was afraid to speak. But he was always hanging about. He must have seen this whole thing.
It's ridiculous even listening to all this.
Ah, you're like a little trades union, all of you, aren't you? And if my guess is right, Crawley, there's a bit of malice in your soul toward me, isn't there? Crawley didn't have much success with Rebecca. But he ought to have more luck this time. And the bride will be grateful for your fraternal arm, Crawley, in a week or so. Every time she faints, in fact.
De Winter!
Maxim, please.
That temper of yours will do you in yet, Max.
Oh, excuse me, gentlemen. Now, is there anything else?
Yes. You might bring Mr. De Winter a sedative.
No, nothing at all. Just leave us.
Very good.
Now, Favell, let's get this business over. As you seem to have worked out the whole thing so carefully, perhaps you can provide us also with a motive.
Ah, I knew you were going to bring that up, Colonel. I've read enough detective stories to know that there must always be a motive. And if you'll all excuse me a moment, I'll supply that too.
I wish you'll go home. You ought not to be here through all this.
Please let me stay, Maxim.
Surely, Colonel Julian, you're not going to allow this fellow to...
My opinion of Favell is no higher than yours, Crawley. But in my official capacity, I have no alternative but to pursue his accusation.
I entirely agree with you, Colonel. In a matter so serious as this, we must make sure of every point, explore every avenue. And in fact, if I may coin a phrase, leave no stone unturned. Ah, here she is, the missing link, the witness who will help supply the motive. Colonel Julian, Mrs. Danvers, I believe you know everyone else.
Won't you sit down?
No offense, Colonel, but I think I'll put this to Danny. She'll understand it more easily. Danny, who was Rebecca's doctor?
Mrs. De Winter always had Dr. McLean from the village.
Now, you heard. I said Rebecca's doctor in London.
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, don't give me that, Danny. You knew everything about Rebecca. You knew she was in love with me, didn't you? Surely you haven't forgotten the good times she and I used to have down at the cottage on the beach.
She had a right to amuse herself, didn't she? Love was a game to her, only a game. It made her laugh, I tell you. She used to sit in her bed and rock with laughter at the lot of you.
Can you think of any reason why Mrs. De Winter should have taken her own life?
No, I refuse to believe it. I knew everything about her and I won't believe it.
There, you see, it's impossible. She knows that as well as I do. Now, listen to me, Danny. We know that Rebecca went to a doctor in London on the last day of her life. Who was it?
I don't know.
Oh, I understand, Danny. You think we're asking you to reveal secrets of Rebecca's life. You're trying to defend her, but that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to clear her name of the suspicion of suicide.
Mrs. Danvers, it has been suggested Mrs. De Winter was deliberately murdered.
There you have it in a nutshell, Danny. But there's one more thing you'll want to know. The name of the murderer. It's a lovely name that rolls off the tongue so easily. George Fortescue Maximilian De Winter.
He was a doctor. Mrs. De Winter sometimes went to him privately. She used to go to him even before she was married.
We don't want reminiscences, Danny. What was his name?
Dr. Baker, 165 Goldhawk Road, Shepherd's Bush.
There you are, Colonel. There's where you'll find your motive. Go and question Dr. Baker. He'll tell you why Rebecca went to him, to confirm the fact that she was going to have a child. A sweet, curly-headed little child.
It isn't true. It isn't true. She would have told me.
She told Max about it. Max, who knew he wasn't the father, so like the gentleman of the old school that he is, he killed her.
I'm afraid we shall have to question this, Dr. Baker.
Here, here. But for safety's sake, I think I'd like to go along, too.
Yes, unfortunately, I suppose you have the right to ask that. I'll see the coroner and have the inquest postponed pending further evidence.
I say, aren't you rather afraid that the prisoner, shall we say, might bolt?
You have my word for it that he will not do that.
Toodaloo, Max. Come along, Danny. Let's leave the unhappy couple to spend their last moments together alone.
Are you sure you don't want me to go with you, Maxim?
No, darling, it'll be very tiring for you. I'll be back the very first thing in the morning, and I won't even stop to sleep.
I'll be waiting for you.
Ready, Maxim?
Yes.
You two go on ahead. I'll follow with Favell. Dr. Baker, you may have seen Mr. De Winter's name in the papers recently.
Oh, yes, yes, in connection with the body that was found in a boat. My wife was reading all about it. A very sad case. My condolences.
No, this is going to take hours. Let me...
Don't bother, Favell. I think I can tell Dr. Baker. We're trying to discover certain facts concerning the late Mrs. De Winter's activities on the day of her death. October the 12th last year. And I want you to tell me, if you can, if anyone of that name paid you a visit on that date.
I'm awfully sorry. I'm afraid I can't help you. I should have remembered the name De Winter. I've never attended a Mrs. De Winter in my life.
Well, how can you possibly tell all your patients' names?
I can look it up in my engagement diary, if you like. Did you say the 12th of October?
Yes.
Here we are. No. No De Winter.
Are you sure?
Well, here are all the appointments for that day. Ross, Campbell, Stedall, Perino, Danvers,
Danny? What the devil?
Would you read that name again? Did you say Danvers?
Yes, I have a Mrs. Danvers for 3 o'clock.
What did she look like? Can you remember?
Yes, I remember her quite well. She was a very beautiful woman. Tall, dark, exquisitely dressed.
Rebecca.
The lady must have used an assumed name.
Is that so? This is a surprise. I'd known her a long time.
What was the matter with her?
My dear sir, there are certain ethics.
Could you supply a reason, Dr. Baker, for Mrs. De Winter's suicide?
For her murder, you mean? She was going to have a kid, wasn't she? Come on, out with it. Tell me, what else would a woman of her class be doing in a dump like this?
I take it the official nature of this visit makes it necessary for me to...
I assure you, we'd not be troubling you if it were not necessary.
You want to know if I can suggest any motive as to why Mrs. De Winter should have taken her life? Yes, I think I can. The woman who called herself Mrs. Danvers was very seriously ill.
She was not going to have a child.
Well, that was what she thought. My diagnosis was different. I sent her to a well-known specialist for an examination and x-rays. And on this date, she returned to me for his report. I remember her standing here, holding out her hand for the photograph. I want to know the truth, she said. I don't want soft words in a bedside manner. If I'm for it, you can tell me right away. I knew she was not the type to accept a lie. She'd asked for the truth. I let her have it. She thanked me. I never saw her again, so I assumed that...
What was wrong with her?
Cancer. Yes, the growth was deep-rooted. An operation would have been no earthly use at all. In a short time, she would have been under morphia. There was nothing that could be done for her, except wait.
Did she say anything when you told her?
She smiled in a queer sort of way. Your wife was a wonderful woman, Mr. De Winter. And oh, yes, I remember she said something that struck me as being very peculiar at the time. When I told her it was a matter of months, she said, "Oh, no, doctor, not that long."
You've been very kind. You've told us all we wanted to know. We should probably need an official verification.
Verification?
Yes, to confirm the verdict of suicide.
I understand. Can I offer you gentlemen a glass of sherry?
Oh, very kind. I think we ought to be going.
Thank heaven we know the truth.
Dreadful thing. Dreadful.
A young and lovely woman like that. No wonder.
I never had the remotest idea. Neither did Danny, I'm sure. I wish I had a drink.
Will we be needed at the inquest any further, Colonel Julian?
I can see to it that Maxim's not trouble any further.
Thank you, sir.
You ready to start, Colonel?
No, thank you. I'm staying in town tonight. And let me tell you, Favell, blackmail is not much of a profession. We know how to deal with it in our part of the world, strange as it may seem to you.
Oh, I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. But if you ever need a new car, Colonel, just let me know.
It's impossible to thank you for your kindness to us through all this. You know what I feel without my saying anything.
Not at all. Put the whole thing behind you. But let your wife know. She'll be getting worried.
Yes, of course. I'll phone her at once, then we'll get straight down to Mandalay.
Goodbye, Crawley. Maxim's got a great friend.
Frank.
Yes, Maxim?
Something you don't know.
Oh, no, there isn't.
I didn't kill her, Frank. But I know now that when she told me about the child, she wanted me to kill her. She lied on purpose. She foresaw the whole thing. That's why she stood there laughing when she...
Don't think about it anymore.
Thank you, Frank.
Hello, Danny. I just wanted to tell you the news. Rebecca held out on both of us. She had cancer. Yes, suicide. And now Max and that dear little bride of his will be able to stay on at Mandalay and live happily ever after. Bye-bye, Danny.
This your car, sir?
Yes?
Will you be going soon? This isn't a parking place, you know.
Oh, isn't it? Well, people are entitled to leave their cars outside if they want to. It's a pity some of you fellows haven't anything better to do.
When you phoned, did she say she'd wait up?
I asked her to go to bed, but she wouldn't hear of it. Wish I could get some more speed out of this thing.
Is something worrying you, Maxim?
I can't get over the feeling something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.